Good afternoon, everyone. We are now live, so we'll get started. Welcome, everyone, to this Employment Committee meeting. My name is Councillor Cal Corkery, and I'm Chair of the committee. Just start off with a couple of pieces of housekeeping. If the continuous fire alarm sounds, please evacuate the room and the public gallery by the stairwells. Do not attempt to use the lifts. Please assemble by the turn-in circle at the end of King Henry Street, past the University's Park building. In order to comply with the Guildhall Trust Fire Marshal regulations, if you signed into the Guildhall, please remember to sign out when you leave the building after today's meeting. May I draw everyone's attention to the fact that this meeting will be live streamed and that the camera zooms in to show the speaker. This is linked to the microphones, therefore can I please remind all attendees to turn their microphones on to speak and then off again once you have finished speaking. Members of the public are permitted to record the meeting on the understanding that it neither disrupts the meeting nor records those stating explicitly that they do not wish to be recorded. Please be advised the public seating area is not a view of the camera used to webcast this meeting. We've got anyone up there today anyway. Right, so before we get started with the full agenda, we'll just go around as is customary and ask people to introduce themselves. So as I said, my name is Cal Corkery, I'm the Chair of the committee. We'll start round to my left with James at the back.
Thank you, Chair. I'm James Harris, Senior Local Democracy Officer.
Thanks, James. Gerald.
Gerald Vernon Jackson, Councillor for Milton.
Sue Page, Finance.
Natasha Edmonds, Director of Corporate Services.
Dave Ashmore, one of the councillors for Fratton.
Matt Atkins, Cosham Councillor.
Yeah, John Woods, I'm Chair of the Portsmouth City Unison branch.
Thanks, Cal. I'm Darren Sanders. I'm one of the councillors for Baffin's Ward.
Thanks, Chairman. Councillor Simon Bosher, Drayton and Farlington Ward.
Right. Thank you all for being here. Right, first item, we've got apologies for absence. As it stands, no apologies have been received, and in fact, I think we're all here anyway, so we've got a full house. Moving on, item 2, declarations of interest. Do any members have any interest to declare in respect of the items to be considered at the meeting? No, I will declare a personal interest in that I'm a member of Unison, seeing as they're given a deputation here today. Right, moving on, we've got the minutes of the last meeting, which was held on the 7th of July, and an extraordinary meeting held on the 26th of August 2022. My understanding is that we didn't have the minutes to consider at the August meeting because it was an extraordinary meeting, so they both get sent and then to the next normal meeting, which is today. So, have members any comments on the minutes? No, I'll take silence as acceptance. Are members happy that I sign the minutes of these meetings as accurate records?
Agreed.
Thank you very much. Right, moving on, we have deputations next. We've received one deputation request from John Woods on behalf of Unison in support of the recommendations contained within the Real Living Wage Accreditation Report, Agenda Item 5. John, would you like to deliver your deputation? As a reminder, you have up to 6 minutes.
Thanks very much. I want to support this recommendation, and what I really want to do is to add some urgency and ask that the Cabinet do two main things when they consider the recommendation. One is to look at the financial impact in the widest possible sense. So we have to think about all the work that goes on in preventing physical and health issues from developing. The intervention early can save huge amounts of money for both social care and for health budgets in the future, and I think that's really, really important to consider when we look at the costings. It's difficult to quantify, but nevertheless they're very real costs and very sizable costs, and they must be taken into account. The second thing I want to recommend is that we also consider the human cost of not paying staff who are contracted by the council the real living wage. We have many people who look after the most vulnerable people and disadvantaged residents and citizens of Portsmouth who are being paid way below the real living wage. And although I'm here in my capacity as Unison Branch Chair, I also work for adult social care and have some experience of some of the difficulties that are going on in adult social care at the moment. First thing I want to do is pay tribute to, the overwhelming majority of social care staff in Portsmouth who are providing an excellent service, working very committed to their work, working in very difficult conditions, and delivering a great service. So I want to put that in a context first of all, because I'm going to go on and talk about some places where that isn't happening. But I do think it's amazing the service that is being delivered to people in residential care, supported living, day services, etc., where despite all the difficulties, the staff are absolutely working their guts out and providing an excellent service to the people of Portsmouth. But we are seeing many care providers having a recruitment and retention crisis of staff. That's an absolute clear issue. It's a national problem and it's clearly impacting in Portsmouth. And the impact on our service users is very serious for some of them and in some cases getting worse. And implementing the real living wage would be a game changer. It really would transform the services. Yesterday we saw the CPI rise to 11.1% and retail price index rise to 14.2%. In that context, we have some social care providers on PCC contracts paying as little as £9.50 an hour, minimum wage, for working evenings, weekends, nights, and no wonder there's a recruitment and retention crisis, because these staff can get easier and better paid jobs elsewhere. And while many like the work, get job satisfaction, are highly skilled and committed, £9.50 an hour does not pay the bills, and they're leaving. I know that, for example, in supported living, we have situations where shifts are not being covered or where agency staff are covering. Now, don't get me wrong, some agency staff are absolutely excellent, but all too often they don't have a commitment to the service and they don't know the people they're supporting. The service users don't know them. I can think of an example where a female service user needed some support in the night. There was a male agency member of staff on who she hadn't seen when she went to bed, hadn't met before, and was understandably distressed and upset about having that level of support. That's the reality, and the knock-on effects for that service user is, anxiety, depression, and if it continues, longer-term health and mental health issues. So care and support work is highly skilled, and it depends on developing relationships with staff based on trust, reliability, compassion and knowledge. And these services have to be highly personalised and cannot be delivered by a constantly changing workforce. We're seeing more and more examples of services where there is a high degree of what we call churn. Staff leaving, a high proportion of new staff, and particularly we're losing experienced members of staff who provide leadership on the shop floor, whether it's in residential care or supported living placements. And it's often the experienced members of staff who actually hold things together, and it really creates problems where you may have enough staff, but they're very inexperienced, they're waiting to go on their training. And you can see the results. Another example, service users being given noodles to eat, instant noodles to eat every day, because she asks for instant noodles. Whereas the care plan says, with a bit of encouragement and approached in the right way, she'll eat proper cooked meals with fruit and vegetables. Again, if you eat instant noodles every meal, the long-term health repercussions are serious. People not being supported to get up and do their daily care because they're using agency staff who don't know them. So people are missing out on day services. These are services that we're contracting and paying for, but people are missing out on. And again, that preventative work is being missed. We're seeing more medication errors because we got, again, the staff are being stretched and they're not able to deliver the sort of service we would want to see. So we're seeing more safeguarding concerns being raised, and hours spent of council staff time and contracted agency staff time in trying to sort out these problems. And we're doing what we can. There are plans in place, but the bottom line is often poverty pay. So the human cost is both to the committed staff who soldier on, watching their colleagues leave to get better and easier paid jobs elsewhere, as well as to the vulnerable adults whose quality of life in some cases is deteriorating. Both these groups are people of Portsmouth. Both these groups of people are Portsmouth residents and citizens, and they're relying on the council to take action on their behalf. So please implement the real living wage for all contracted staff as a matter of urgency. Just one final point. I know the calculations of the costs are difficult to make, but we have to consider, I know that there's quite a lot of variation between what the council pays and what the contractors then pay their staff. And sometimes we're paying, it doesn't automatically mean the more that the council pays that the more the staff get. So there may be people, contractors who actually have some scope to implement the real living wage without the council actually having to increase the cost, and I hope that's being looked at, because sometimes in some of the agencies we're contracted with, there's an element of profit there. So I think we really need to consider that. So finally, just to sum up, urgently we need to implement the real living wage now. Don't delay. Please urge the Cabinet to get on with it. Thank you.
Great. Thank you very much, John. Thank you for coming along today and giving your deputation. The trade unions are always more than welcome, and its committee. It's great to see you here today and hear that kind of really important insight into the impacts on the front line that low wages can have on the delivery of public services. So thank you. Right, moving on. We will come back. The living wage report is taken later on in the agenda, but we'll follow it as structured and then come back to that if that's okay. So the next item we've got on the agenda is item 4, which is the Health and Safety Annual Report for the period 1st of April 21 to the 31st of March 22. And I think I'm asking Linda Martin, Health and Safety Manager, to introduce the report. Thank you.
Is that working? Can everybody hear me? Thank you. So you have received today the annual report for the time period explained. Also the 21-22 action plan and the new action plan for this year. The headings within the report were policy, risks, COVID-19, training, incidents, visits from enforcing authorities, monitoring, communication and consultation, and within the action plan the headings are management system, policy, schools, audit, consultation and communication, incident review, training, risks and the health and safety team. Progress against the action plan this year is going well. We've given updates to the Health and Safety Forum in March and June and September, and another meeting is scheduled in the early December. Any questions? Things are going very well. There's good engagement. Risks are being controlled. Guidance is being updated. So I have no concerns to bring to your attention.
Right. Thank you very much, Linda. Members, have you got any comments or questions for the officers on this report? Councillor Bosher.
Thank you very much, Cal. Couple of things I've got questions on. The first one is under item 7, training. And 7.1 has a little table there which shows that for this past year we're down 24% on the 2020-2021, which was the peak of the pandemic. So we've actually gone down subsequent to the pandemic. 7.3 says the reasons for the reduction in training completion are likely to include capacity challenge presented by the pandemic. Well, this is the year after the pandemic, but I'd like to understand what capacity challenge actually means.
The previous year is because the training's online, and when staff were working at home and unable to work as much on their normal duties as such, they were able to catch up with the training. So I think there's an element of that the following year when everybody was returning more to normal duties. Natasha, would you be able to embellish on capacity to why we think that might be the case as well?
I don't want to hazard any guesses. What would be more helpful, if I may, is to take this away and do a little bit more investigation and come back to you separately, if that's all right.
That would be fine if it could come back with something, but I'm going to follow up with some questions anyway. You've said this is an online training. Is it mandatory, and is it annual, so that everybody has to go through this training on an annual basis if it's online?
We've got a mixture. The mandatory training is the induction that people do as they join the organisation.
Yeah.
If they're designated as a DSE user, they need to do the DSE training. They need to do the fire safety training. So there's mandatory training, and then there's job-specific training, which again potentially could be a reason in the drop that we need to do more of that review of the risks and ensure people's training is up to date. there's a review cycle on the training, which is in the majority of the training courses 3 yearly.
I think there's a wider issue, and perhaps it would be nice if we could have something that's a bit more of a deep dive, because I'd be keen to understand if there are employees that are part of mandatory training that perhaps are slipping because they're working hybridly and they're not keeping up with it, and just to understand those figures in a little bit more depth. Because on face value, to me, an over 20% drop does not look good when you're talking about health and safety. And I think we need to have a better understanding of exactly where that's happening and why it's actually happening and what we are actually doing to make sure that those people do it.
I think with my work that I'm doing with the risk identification, with job-specific roles, we'll definitely be able to pick up on that, and you'll see improvements going forwards. And with the mandatory training, can definitely confirm that we have those reports. We bring them to the Health and Safety Forum, and the compliance figures are shared with the directorates, and they are tasked with improving those levels of compliance. So that is, we are actually on that and proactively following that up.
Right, okay. If we could perhaps bring something back on that, that'd be fine.
We can, thank you.
I do have another question, and this is in Appendix 1, and there's an Action 2 to continue to review the overarching health and safety policy to change the emphasis to a more proactive approach, etc., etc. It had a target date of 6 months ago, and it's just got ongoing beside it,
okay.
which in my speak says we haven't done it. And it's sort of caveated with, once these new ways of working are embedded, which again says to me that we haven't embedded these yet, so we don't know when we're actually going to finish reviewing this policy. And if I go through to Appendix 2, unless I've missed it, it doesn't appear there, unless it's reworded as item 9. But even so, whether it was included in Appendix 2 or not, that's all set for March 2023, which says to me either we're just going to keep going with it or we've extended the deadline by a year to actually do it. Can you give us an update on what this actual ongoing actually means? Because I've seen plenty of these where ongoing means we haven't done it yet.
Yep. So
Darren's smiling because he knows exactly what I mean.
The task of reviewing health and safety in PCC is quite large, and reviewing guidance and renewing that and embedding it into the organisation. We're a team of 3 people, so we are prioritising, and the policy that we have in place is fit for purpose. The wish to change it to a more proactive approach based on the HSE's leading health and safety at work document, which has a plan, do, check, act model, is sort of like the icing on the cake. So the document that we have is 100% fit for purpose. I'd rather review everything that we've got and embed it within the organisation. We're hearing from everybody, with everybody being very busy, that there are the day job, the work job. So I'm prioritising on our risk areas and making sure they're covered. And as I say, the policy that will reflect what's embedded will follow. So it is literally the icing on the cake, the document that sort of ratifies what is being put in place and being reviewed. So it's best practice. What we've got now is fit for purpose, and there is no concern for you.
Natasha, were you wanting to come in? What was that previous?
Yes, if I may. I just to put some context around this. I think when Linda first joined us, which was probably about a year ago now, the framework that we have is a range of different policies, and so the wording on that action is probably not helpful because it doesn't describe that context. So we've got a number of policies but a huge amount of guidance documents. So what Linda is in the process of doing is writing an overarching policy but then tidying up all of the guidance documents, which are the on-the-ground practical activities that we undertake. I think it's a bigger task than just writing a policy, and so the ongoing element isn't about writing a policy. The policy is written. It's about consolidating all of the guidance and making sure that the relevant functions and services have got the right guidance for the work that they are undertaking, and moving that documentation into an environment that is easily accessible. So a lot of the paperwork and the policy and the guidance documents were on a system called Policy Hub. There are an awful lot of staff that don't have access to Policy Hub, and a wide range of staff that don't actually even work with computers. So Linda spent a lot of time moving some of that guidance documents onto more accessible formats, so that it is accessible to a wider range of staff who actually need the guidance. So I think what we probably can do is adapt the wording so that it actually describes better what the task is and why it is ongoing. So separate out the policy work from the development of the procedures and the guidance, because it's quite wide. And just to come back on the mandatory training piece, that I have actually asked colleagues to review mandatory training. The mandatory training that we do deliver has been a sort of a blanket approach of everybody needs to do everything, rather than being a bit more nuanced around making sure that those staff, their mandatory training is relevant to the role that they are performing, rather than everybody doing everything when it's not always relevant to the role that they are performing. So that is also underway at the moment. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Darren?
Thanks, Carl. I'm even more cynical than Simon if I ever hear anything called ongoing, because it means it ain't been done and ain't going to be done. And I think that's not fair. Linda's done some great work in the last year. I would support Simon's suggestion of having a deeper look, particularly at the training, because it sounds to me like doing it online works and doing it in person doesn't, which may upset some people. Perhaps coming back with dates for various key aspects, realistic dates, not dates to keep us happy, but dates that are realistic, and also a deeper dive as to why training has gone down. And if it is because doing it online attracts more people, then we do it online, to me. So I think that would be helpful, but definitely some dates. I think Simon and I are too old to read ongoing in the most sincere manner possible. But thank you both.
Okay, thank you. Any further comments or questions on this report?
Right, Chairman, just an undertaking that something will come back that is more specific around that training to a later meeting, I think.
Yeah, I mean, my suggestion on that was perhaps, report.
This is a noting report. Perhaps we could just have it minuted that something will come back.
Yeah, and I think that it might be useful for the committee's benefit to have a kind of report that looks at training in the whole, so obviously picking up on the health and safety training that's been flagged, but understanding what the training offer is, like you said, Natasha, how that's maybe changing and going to be specific to people's job roles, and also then how that is kind of monitored on an ongoing basis to ensure that it's being done.
So I think the next meeting of this committee is in January. Would that be appropriate? Or March is the next one after that?
I think I come twice a year, so if I could make the request for March, that would be a better period of time for me to be able to look at the statistics and hopefully see an improvement as well.
Yeah. Can I suggest that we take the formal report in March, but some of the immediate issues that have been flagged up maybe can be kind of fed back before then offline?
Yes, absolutely fine. Yeah.
Great. That'll be a relief.
It has been known.
Okay, brilliant. So if that concludes all the comments and questions, so that is, recommended that the report is noted. Is the report noted, members? Yep, agreed. Okay, brilliant. Right, moving on. Item number 5 is the workforce profile. And I think Natasha is due to introduce this report.
Yes, thank you, Chair. So this is the annual workforce profile. It reflects the workforce profile from the previous year, from 2021. This is something that we do to provide information around the nature and the makeup of the workforce, but also assist in our compliance with the public sector equality duty. It remains a work in progress, but it is a start. Some of the highlights from the report: the gender balance remains very similar than it has in previous years. We are getting older as a workforce, though. We are 4% more staff are 60 and over compared to 2020. I think that reflects the national demographic, though. A correction, I think in previous years, the proportion of staff reported as living in the city reported those in PO 1 to 5. It didn't reflect the city boundary. So that is now corrected to show all staff that live within the PO 1 to 6, which is the city boundary, and shows that although the number of people working in Portsmouth City Council who live in the city has gone down, it is still over half of our workforce that are residents of the city. So that's worth noting. There are still some challenges around the ethnicity makeup of the workforce, and also on recording of staff with disabilities. So we have got a number of protected characteristics that we're not able to report on. Some of this is related to the change in systems from our old EBS system to our new Fusion system. We have noticed that a lot of data hasn't transferred across, so we have been running a campaign encouraging our staff to record their information so that we can actually report on it and know what actions we need to take, both to support those staff but also to address the demographic profile of our workforce so that it's better representative of the city. But also to help us in managing the workforce so that it is a workforce that is able and fit to deliver the services that our residents rely on. So I think that's probably the highlights to share with you, but I will stop there and ask if anybody has any questions.
Great, thank you, Natasha. Members, Simon, do you want to kick us off?
I noticed that Natasha used work in progress rather than ongoing in that comment. I've got a couple of comments. The first one is a bit of an old bugbear of mine, and this probably goes right back to the days of the Spinnaker Tower. And this is workforce profile 3. The proportion of staff who live within the city boundary goes on to say, in PO districts, PO 1 to PO 6, Drayton and Farlington has got some PO7 in it. Yes. It's got enough that the report is incorrect, particularly when the same comment goes on to talk about PO1 to PO5. So it's just, perhaps I'm being a little bit picky in what I'm saying, but we do contain some PO7 in our ward. Which always fills up my inbox when somebody like the Spinnaker Tower says we're going to do concessions for everybody who live in Portsmouth PO1 to PO6. I then get a whole raft of emails saying, but we're in Portsmouth and we're PO7, where do we sit? The other one I've got is around this moving over from EBS Oracle to Fusion, which is also the payroll system as well, because I think I've tried my best to pick my way through that. But surely that contains information about people's postcodes on it because it contains all their pay data, doesn't it? So how has things like where they are from a point of view of their postcode not actually been transferred over? Or are we getting into a GDPR type thing?
No, so the postcode information has transferred over. The information around things like ethnicity, disability status, whether you're a veteran, are not standardised fields. So they're not compulsory fields that have to be filled in, as opposed to things like bank details, name, gender, etc. They are compulsory fields that you can't. The system won't work if you don't. So we've got that. But things like whether you are disabled, whether you are a veteran, what your ethnicity is, we ask staff to complete that themselves. And if they don't, then we can't report on it.
Thank you. Any other comments or questions, members, on this report? Matt?
My understanding is that actually the number of postcodes where that will count as Portsmouth has increased by the inclusion of PO6, but the number of staff living in Portsmouth appears to have gone down very substantially. Is there a particular reason that we've identified?
I think it reflects some of the challenges that we're experiencing, like many others, in recruiting. And so we are having to cast our net further afield and recruit people from areas beyond the city boundaries and even local areas. And that reflects the national picture where there is greater mobility of the workforce, and the recruitment challenge is one that we share with not just other public sector organisations, but even private sector organisations. So we're having to look further afield.
Okay, any further questions or comments? Just one from me, if I may. The point 7 under section 3 talks about turnover increasing year on year by around 2%. Do we have any kind of indication of the reasons for that?
Yeah, so the top reason is not known. People are not always recording. The next available reason as a top reason for people leaving is around career progression. So they are leaving for better jobs. We also know that in more recent months, beyond the reporting period here, we are starting to see exits for people going to higher paying roles.
Okay, thank you, Natasha. And presumably those are trends that exist within the wider employment sector, not just specific to
Indeed, yeah. I mean, the range of roles that are becoming increasingly difficult is broader than traditionally was the case. So it's traditionally been very difficult to recruit, for example, social workers, particularly children's social workers. Planners have also been very difficult to recruit. We're seeing that expand now into a much broader range of roles. It's difficult to recruit within finance, legal, obviously social work remains the case. Transport roles are becoming increasingly difficult to recruit to. Digital roles and IT are very difficult. I think since the pandemic, a lot of organisations are investing in that digital space, so they're becoming increasingly hard and higher paid elsewhere. And we also have ONS, the Office for National Statistics, down the road, so they are very good at poaching a lot of people with digital skills and analytical capability, so, not just from us, but across the board.
Great, thank you. And just to follow up to that, as I understand it, some roles that are particularly hard to recruit to can be topped up. I think, is it called a market supplement payment? I wonder, just since on that topic, you could tell us what the kind of approach and policy is to using those.
So the policy on market supplements would be that they are to be used for recruitment and retention purposes. So if there is any difficulty in recruiting to a role, then market data can be looked at to see what else the pay rates are, what other pay rates are in the market for a particular role, and if the criteria for recruitment or retention are complied with, then a market supplement can be applied to a particular role, and that will be based on benchmarking of market rates specific to that role.
Okay, thank you. Matt.
A couple of quick questions following up from that. Has the overall number of people employed by PCC changed substantially, and are there any figures on how much we are currently using these kind of market supplements?
So the workforce profile data does show an increase in the number of roles in the organisation. So let me just go to the appendix. I think it's an increase of about 200 roles in 2021, but I would caveat that by saying some of those will be related to the pandemic response, and when we come now to 2022, a lot of those roles will have gone. So things like teams around testing and tracing, some of the communications capacity we needed around the pandemic. In terms of the market supplement data, I don't have that to hand because that's not something that we look at in the workforce profile, but certainly I can get that information if that would be of interest to the committee and share it separately.
Yes, please, Natasha, if that could be circulated in due course. Any further comments or questions on this report? No? Okay, so this report is also information only, so it's just for noting, and members, is the report noted? Agreed? Okay, thank you. Right, moving on to the last report, item number 6, real living wage accreditation. So I believe I'm asking myself to introduce this report, which is fine. So this is really just an update on some work that's been taking place outside of the committee. So at a previous committee meeting, we agreed to set up a cross-party group to go away and delve a little bit more into the detail of the issues around achieving real living wage accreditation, getting a better understanding of what the kind of financial consequences are, the pros and cons, etc. So we set up a kind of subcommittee, I guess, with representation from different political groups, and we explored those issues with officers. The report then is the kind of us bringing that back to the committee with a series of recommendations. And one thing probably is worth updating as well in terms of the report is the information that's been announced today in terms of the Chancellor's statement with regards to the national living wage, aka the minimum wage, which is going to be increased to £10.42. So that obviously has an impact on what the differential is between the minimum wage and the real living wage, which I believe is the difference between £10.42 and £10.90 now. So a difference of 48p, is it? Quick mental maths there. Understand the difference previously, so the figures that we've got in the report are based on a differential of 40p an hour. So clearly there's going to be an uplift there that I'd imagine is kind of around the amount then of 8p an hour. I don't know, Sue, if there's anything additional you wish to say on that, just in light of today's news.
Not really. I think you've got the gist of it. Yes. I mean, the figures were based on the 40p differential because we didn't have both numbers for next year. Now we've got them. It's going to be 48p. So that, yes, that would push the 2 million that we quoted before up slightly to nearer 2.5.
Okay, thank you very much. Gerald.
Thanks. I think all parties think this is the right thing to do and want to move towards making sure this happens. It is a process that we're going to have to go through as a council to identify the savings that need to be made to be able to make sure that we can pay for this. Because I think, as we all agreed, if we're going to do this, we have to make sure that this is done from sustainable funding sources, not just a one-off, because the worst possible thing we could do would be for these people who are on the minimum wage would be to increase it in 1 year and then remove it the next year because we hadn't got sustainable funding. So we need to work on this. I think everybody's on the same page about trying to make sure that this happens. I think we will need to see if there is also a decision by the Living Wage Foundation following the very high levels of inflation, whether they're going to increase their view about what the real living wage will be. I expect that there will be an announcement over the next few weeks, but we need to factor that in. But I'm encouraged that it's the amount of savings we need to find to make this happen has fallen from 3 million to 2.5 million, which is going in the right direction. I just don't know how easy it will be to be able to find that money. But I think it's a prioritisation decision for all of us. There are some things that the council currently does, and where staff are employed, where it may be our view that it is more valuable to the community to make sure that people particularly in adult social care, are paid more than other people carrying on in their roles within the council. We've just got to try to make sure that we get the balance right, and that's something we're going to have to work on between ourselves over the next few months. But I think everybody's on the same page of trying to make sure that this happens, if at all possible.
Great, thank you, Gerald. Darren?
Thank you. I would support what Gerald has said, but make a couple of observations, if I may. The first is that there are two budgets in this organisation, and as far as I'm concerned, this is related to the general fund. As the budget holder constitutionally for the housing revenue account, I believe I've done this already. I've spoken to Natasha. I don't recognise the £3,000, £5,000, £7,000 we got fined. If I'm wrong, then we'll make damn sure that we find it, because we can do that. And in doing this, I've set a series of criteria, which is 1, no cuts to services; 2, no cuts to investment; and 3, as Gerald has rightly said, it is a sustainable multi-year programme. Now, we've been able to do that, but I think previously, particularly with social care, there's a whole raft of other factors in there that needs to be looked at. What is the impact of the extra investment coming in, announced today in social care, partly by delaying the DIL-NOT review for 2 years? Secondly, can I ask a question of Natasha? Is that all right, Cal? Natasha, if we were to increase council tax by 5%, and let's say, for instance, extra money was to go on adult social care, which has been all the mood music that's come around from the Treasury briefings over the last few days, would that be the silver bullet that would deal with the issues that John raised and John Woods raised and other people have raised with regards to adult social care? A yes or no answer usually. If it's ongoing, I'm not going to take it. But a yes or no answer would usually help.
I'm not sure I can answer the question, because I mean, in terms of the financial aspect, I would refer that to Chris or to Sue. Whether it's a silver bullet, I think, what motivates people at work, some of it is going to be money. We've all got bills to pay, but there will be other factors at play in terms of what makes you get out of bed and go to work every day. And I think particularly in adult social care, we're very lucky. We've got a very dedicated and committed group of staff who see it as a profession. I don't think anybody would want to leave that profession. They do it because they have I suppose, a moral commitment to the work that they do, and that gives us an opportunity to support those people beyond pay. And look at other factors around how we support them and how we create, for those that want it, a career opportunity to progress, and other factors that might support them and keep them in the profession. I would suspect if you wanted to be a millionaire, you wouldn't go to work and set out for a career in care. So there's other reasons why people work in this sector beyond just the money. So silver bullet, probably not.
Okay, that's kind, Natasha. Thank you very much. I mean, I do think, as an observation, I do think some of the systemic stuff that John talked about in his deputation earlier on needs to be looked at. I would also note that what John said, he wants it now for every worker, and that is not being proposed in this thing here. But I know it can be done, but you have to make sure that it's done systemically and sustainably, with no cuts to services, no cuts to investment, and ideally no cuts to staff. And that's been achieved in the budget I oversee. I know Cabinet has been considering this for 2 to 3 years, frankly, and we've all come up against the same thing, which is, does it mean cuts in services? Does it mean cuts in investment? Does it mean cuts in staff? So happy that my Cabinet colleagues consider it again for the general fund, but I think if we're going to do this, we have to be grown up about it. Thank you, Cal.
Thank you, Darren. Any further comments or questions on the report? No, I guess. So just to conclude before we move on to the recommendations, I guess what we're looking at today is making a recommendation to Cabinet and I guess then onwards to full council to consider as part of the budget setting process this year that funding be found in order to achieve living wage accreditation, which would mean a pay increase for several thousand people working on the front line, quite often in social care services and some of the most important jobs in the city, but also on the lowest pay. Clearly there is going to be a financial cost to that. I think it was an interesting point made in the deputation, and one that we've picked up before actually, around what that cost is and whether in fact we would require to uplift the rates to everyone, because we know, for example, the information we've been provided, that previously the figure was estimated that around half of social care providers were already paying at the previous living wage rate. So I think there is a question there actually whether you would need to obviously increase the rates entirely across the board in order to achieve what we're trying to do. So I think there's kind of further investigation needed around that, but probably the proper place for those further financial investigations is as part of the budget setting process, obviously led by Cabinet. But hopefully, with this in mind, we can have a kind of a cross-party approach to the budget setting process that includes opposition groups as well, so we can try and delve into the depths of the detail and some of the challenges. So just before we move on to the recommendations, I think Darren wants to come back in.
Sorry, just to follow on that, if any political group or any council has got any bright ideas as to how we can, as any proposals they have, as early as possible to feed it in as possible. It shouldn't be we as the Cabinet should be considering this and everyone else palms off their approaches. If you or anyone else, Carol's got any bright ideas and I'm going to find £2.5 million, then please send them forwards.
And I think as the spokesperson for opposition groups here, I would say if the Cabinet wants to include us at an earlier point, then we may well have the opportunity to do that. So we'll see how that plays out as the year goes on. Joe.
Very happy to invite you to come forward with your ideas where savings can be found.
Okay, not quite what we asked for, but we'll leave it at
that. We have to balance the budget, and the only way of doing that is either identifying additional income streams, and there are additional income streams, or finding things we don't do. It would be very helpful to have any ideas from people about how we can square the budget. The meetings I'm having at the moment about budget, departments are on the whole saying that their budgets are not great enough already, and they need additional money, not the other way around. So I'm very happy to hear ideas of where we can find funding for this from anybody and everybody.
I just want to make the point that obviously there's a very large sum of money in the budget coming this year where we may already be making savings, and I think the challenge faced by opposition groups is I could throw out ideas that I know will save money. For example, we should have a recruitment freeze, but without being involved in the actual discussions with the officers that involved in setting the budget the Cabinet get, I can't tell you what the implications of that are, so it's not exactly responsible. So asking for suggestions is one thing, but how, I can make suggestions, but they won't necessarily be realistic because we're not actually involved in the full process of setting the budget. So the Cabinet does have to take some responsibility for whether or not it wants to do this and how it finds the money for doing this. And it's not realistic to expect the opposition groups to be able to offer more than very broad stroke suggestions as to what we could or couldn't do.
We are digressing slightly. Can I just suggest a point of consensus might be that there's probably opportunities for us all to work together better on this year's budget process and leave it at that for the moment.
Pick up Matt's thing. I think that's a really good example that we can take away and look at to see what a recruitment freeze might do. Because you're right that in some areas we can't, like in children's social care and adult social care, but it may be other areas where we can do a recruitment freeze and look to move money out of departments so that we can look at that. So I think things like that are really well worth looking at, and I'm happy to do that.
Great, thank you very much. Moving on then in terms of the recommendations we've got before us. So, members, the recommendation of the report is that the Employment Committee, so as we are here today, does firstly ask the Cabinet to consider including the real living wage accreditation in the upcoming budget setting process and to seek sustainable funding. And two, ask the Cabinet that in the budget setting process, the financial impact is assessed using data previously provided to the committee on which to base its assumptions, subject to the announcement of the revised living wage rate for 2023, which is expected to be announced in November by Living Wage Foundation. So point 2 there has kind of been superseded by events, but I think we can probably take it as it is. So I'm happy to propose these recommendations as they are. Do I have a seconder? Darren, thank you very much. Thank you very much for seconding it. Members, are the recommendations agreed? Agreed? Perfect. Thank you very much. Thank you very much for that discussion as well. I think it's useful for all parties, political and not, in terms of taking this forward. Hopefully there will be opportunities for us all to work together on this year's budget setting process to understand the position the council is in and where opportunities may arise and where there may be kind of choices to be made about how funding is distributed and spent. Thank you all very much. So thank you, members. That concludes the business on the agenda for this meeting. Thank you for your attendance, and close the meeting at 2:50. Thank you.